Hi everyone, this is Neel, Raithatha, consultant, audiologist and director of CLEARscope. Thank you for joining me in my latest video using the iCLEARscope endoscope. This is of a patient who attended with bilateral chronic otitis externa. This is their right ear, it's actually the better ear out of the two. I will upload their left ear tomorrow hopefully. And they've been suffering on and off with their outer ear infection for the last couple of years. Been to see their GP several times and historically been prescribed antibiotics. A month or so back, they had an ear swab taken and it deduced a fungal infection, so they were giving antifungals. And then when they went back for the follow-up, the infection was still present, so they took another swab and it found that this patient had a bacterial infection again, and they had Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is a gram-negative bacteria, which is not typically found in the ear. So our ears, the skin that lines the ear canal, has its own ecosystem. We call it skin flora. And residing on the surface of the skin is various non-pathogenic bacteria and fungi. And the typical bacteria that live on the surface of the skin are acidophilic. So they thrive under acidic conditions and the ear is mildly acidic. Pseudomonas aeruginosa, however, in order for it to colonize and breed, it requires more of a neutral pH. And you can often find Pseudomonas aeruginosa in water. More so in big organizations like hospitals or GP practices where you've got a complex water network of pipes, because in some of the corners, some of the piping is wear and teared. It creates a crevice for Pseudomonas aeruginosa to kind of find home and breed. You can also find it in tap water at home. And this is why I always say try and avoid water getting to the ear, because when the patient, when I was asking about their history and what potential triggers may have caused this infection, they did say they did get some water in at the time, but since they are being very careful. So water not only elevates the pH in the ear to a more neutral pH, but it can also introduce Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And Pseudomonas aeruginosa is a gram-negative bacteria. And so there's two types of bacteria. You get a gram-positive and a gram-negative. With a gram-positive bacterium, it has a very thick cell membrane. Conversely, a gram-negative bacterium has a very thin cell membrane. However, it's encapsulated in a lipid capsule, if you like. And as a result, it's much harder for antibiotics to penetrate the lipid capsule that encapsulates gram-negative bacterium. Also, gram-negative bacterium have tended to mutate and evolve, and it's developed a resistance to a lot of antibiotics, and that the genetic code for that resistance is then shared amongst other Pseudomonas aeruginosa bacterium in the ear. So this was being treated by topical ciprofloxacin. I hope I pronounced that correctly now. That was historically in the UK prescribed for ear infections by ENT off-label, because they're normally used for eye infections. However, now the manufacturer have branded them specifically for topical, for otic use, so for the use in the ear. So they also so ciprofloxacin is also typically given for malignant otitis externa intravenously and also topically, because again with malignant otitis externa the main bacterium is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Ciprofloxacin is also very good, well, I must say all very good. It's believed to be non-ototoxic, so it can also be prescribed for patients with perforations of the eardrum or T-tubes, we call grommets, ventilation tubes. So most antibiotics for ear infection in the UK are they're part of a group called aminoglycosides. And the way the aminoglycosides work within the cell body, you have different organelles, so the nucleus, mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, ribosomes. And the ribosomes have there's two parts and they're connected. And one part of the ribosome reads the genetic code, and it then sends the other subpart of the ribosome to within the cell itself to retrieve different amino acids, because proteins are a chain of amino acids. So what aminoglycosides do, they inhibit the function of the subpart of the ribosome. I think it's a subpart, not the main body. So it prevents it from retrieving the necessary amino acids to link together to replicate the bacterium. So basically, aminoglycosides, they don't directly kill the bacterium, but it prevents the bacterium from multiplying, essentially. But aminoglycosides, many of them, and most of the aminoglycosides, the active ingredient themselves, they end in mycin, so whether it be gentamicin, erythromycin, streptomycin, neomycin. So MICIN at the end or MYCIN at the end. So aminoglycosides typically are not prescribed for infections in the ear canal where there's a perforation, although some ENT I know have prescribed it because they have to weigh up whether for the patient to continue to have their ear infection or use some of these heavy-duty aminoglycosides to kill the infection or stop it from multiplying. But with ciprofloxacin, it's normally prescribed with perforations, as I said, because it's believed not to cause damage. So with these aminoglycosides, if they enter the middle ear through the perforation, it can get absorbed via the round window, sometimes even the oval window in the cochlea, the organ of hearing. And if absorbed, it can cause damage to the sensory hair cells within the cochlea, the organ of hearing, causing cell death, necrosis. So it can affect your hearing. Ciprofloxacin is not believed to have that same issue. And ciprofloxacin are very good, where they said Pseudomonas aeruginosa, although I think there's different strains of Pseudomonas aeruginosa as well, substrains, and some of them are kind of resistant to ciprofloxacin as well. So it's not a nice bacterium to have in the ear. The infections are very hard to fight. There's a bit of skin here in the inferior recess. Now, this patient, going back, so they've got chronic infections. They were told by their GP to see myself to have their ears cleaned prior to using the topical medications. I was in Australia at the time, so they saw another specialist locally. Went back to the GP, said, look, your ear's still, you've got all this debris. I was back by then, so they came in, and we've just really peeled this. Now, this is the better ear out of the two. They have got a slight attic retraction, but the neck pressure behind the eardrum's fine. I will upload their left ear soon. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Bye.